So, you're thinking of living in New Jersey, or perhaps you already live here and you just want to move in general? Well, today we're going to talk about two things in real estate that get confused all the time. So, if you want to know what those two things are, stay tuned because we're getting after it right now. If this is your first time to the Living in New Jersey channel, please feel free to click the subscribe button, tap the bell for notifications so you can be the first one to be alerted to the ever-changing and slightly complex real estate market of New Jersey, and of course, awesome bomb videos like this one. This is going to be good. My name is Matthew Williamson. I'm a luxury realtor here in New Jersey, and the Living in New Jersey team and myself on the daily get calls, texts, emails, carrier pigeons, smoke signals. No to the faxes, folks. We won't do it. Sound the alarm. No to the faxes. We're not going to do faxes. It's not 1708. It's not going to do it. It's not going to happen. But we get communication on the daily from people just like you, home shoppers looking for a home, and they want to be turned into people like you see here on the screen. Those are amazing reviews and awesome clients that made it to the closing table. And they are genuinely happy, and so are their smiles and reactions. So once again, whether you're looking to move in 3 weeks, 6 months, 2 days, 24 hours is kind of quick, but 24 hours, we can make it happen. And the person I have with me today is an expert on the finance side of real estate. And we are gonna get to the bottom of two things that get confused all the time. But before the expert kicks it off and we kick it off talking about the subject, why don't you introduce yourself?
How's it going? My name is Brian DeVito. I'm a Senior Vice President of Mortgage Lending with Guaranteed Rate.
Excellent. How long have you been doing this?
17 years.
Wow. That's a long time, folks.
It is.
How many weeks?
But it's a lot of experience, too. So
it is a lot of experience. How many weeks is 70?
I have no idea. I'd have to get the calculator out.
Yeah, it's
17,
too much.
520, and another, what is that, 354?
Carry the one. That's a lot. Anyways, a lot of weeks,
774?
folks. 774? 70, something like that?
I have to check my math.
Check your math. So the two things that we're going to talk about today that I have had so many buyers be confused on is down payment versus closing costs, folks. These are two separate things. So the first thing we want to talk about is down payment. Now, as a real estate professional, as a realtor, so many times when I'm talking to a seller, if I'm representing a buyer, I've had conversations where unfortunately the seller and the real estate professional on the other side, they become all of a sudden mortgage lenders. You know,
stay in your lane.
Yeah, stay in your lane. It's good. Stay in your lane. Where they're like, the down payment's kind of low. That has nothing to do with the seller. Down payment has nothing to do with the seller. Mr. Expert in lending, what is that all about?
I mean, the down payment's going to be between the buyer and the bank. The down payment varies amongst the different loan programs. So, FHA, you're going to see a minimum down payment of 3.5%. On a conventional loan, the minimum down payment's going to be 3%. If somebody was a veteran, they may not be required to put a down payment down. If they have the income to support the mortgage, they can finance 100% of the property. However, like Matt said, you're going to have closing costs on all those loans. So, that's something that the buyer's going to need on top of whatever their down payment is.
And just to go back just for a quick second to the VA, the veterans, we both want to say thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service. We appreciate it very, very much.
USA.
Yeah, and it allows us to make videos like this. So thank you. In regards to closing costs, down payments between the buyer and the lender. Let's be real clear. Before we move on to the next topic, it's between the buyer and the lender. So as we said out of the start, if you have a seller or a realtor on the other side who's like, your down payment's kind of low, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. That's a down payment, and that's between the buyer and this guy right here. Now, we're going to push that out of the way. We're going to push the down payment, right? We're going to get the closing costs. I talk to so many buyers, and when I'm talking to them, whether they use Brian or if they don't, shame on them, by the way. Shame on them for not using Brian. But they'll say, hey, I've got a pre-approval. I got X amount, type of loan. I have this type of percentage down. I'm an FHA. I'm a conventional. Yeah. And when I talk with them, as the conversation progresses and we first get to know each other, I'll bring up closing cost. And they're kind of like,
What is that?
Is that like down payment? I'm like, no, it's not. It's your closing cost. And to be clear, New Jersey does have some high closing costs, especially when you consider, and Brian will get more into this, but especially I think about property tax. And typically,
correct,
5 to 6 months usually.
Typically about 5 months, depending upon when someone closes. But, if the taxes are $12,000 and $12,000 in taxes in New Jersey is a common thing, 5 months, that's $5,000 as part of the closing costs.
So as we obviously segue into closing costs with that comment. Realistically, yeah, if you have a house and you've got $12,000 a year in taxes, and if you're bad in math, folks, that's $1,000 a month. Just gonna put that out there. You're starting out of the gate. Your closing cost number, it's easy to figure out where you're gonna start. It's $5,000.
Correct.
Right? So in New Jersey, you tend to have a really high closing cost. Now, I will say, if you read blogs online, you Google and all of that stuff, you'll see all these weird numbers. It can be 3% to 5% of whatever the value is. And, the downside, I think it's slightly a downside, is as a home buyer, obviously you're counting all the money, right? You're counting the beads on the abacus. That's a really old analogy, the abacus. That's like from the Egyptians, maybe. I don't know. That's way back when. But the abacus, but you're counting your pennies, basically, bottom line. And you want to know, how much are my closing costs going to be? I need to bring that check to closing. And having worked with enough buyers, I can tell you that number is like a dark cloud that will loom over you because you don't get the final figure until usually like just a few days before closing. To dive deeper into it and peel back the layers of the onion, Brian kind of hit on the amalgamation, the mix of what makes up closing costs. Obviously, we said property tax, and usually you're escrowing about 5 months worth.
Correct.
And in a home, on this analogy, where you got 12 grand worth of taxes, our starting number, cha-ching, is going to be $5,000.
Yep.
All right, and take it from there and just kind of let us know what else might we expect to be paying or who we might pay in closing costs.
Gotcha. So you're also going to have lender fees. Aside from the lender fees, you're going to have an appraisal fee if the property requires an appraisal. Credit report fees, like Matthew said, you're going to have escrow money for taxes. You're also going to have to get homeowners insurance on that property. And aside from paying the first year's premium, we're also going to need another 2 to 3 months to go into escrow to count towards the renewal the year after you bought the home. You're also going to have an attorney fee, unless you don't use an attorney, but I don't know why anybody would do that.
That's a good one. I don't want to interrupt the flow.
I mean,
in Jersey, use an attorney, folks. Use an attorney. Go ahead, boss.
You're going to have title insurance. Title insurance is basically where they do a search on the property and the sellers to see if there's any open liens, judgments, mortgages. All of those have to get paid off at closing. So when you close, you're getting the property with what's called a clean chain of title. You're going to have recording fees. So after you close, the title company is going to have to record the mortgage and the deed in the town and county that you purchased in. Those fees vary per county. So, it's not like we could just give somebody a magic number and say, okay, you're buying a $500,000 house, your closing costs are 3%. No, it doesn't work because in New Jersey, we could look at a $500,000 house, say in 3 different counties, taxes are all going to be different. Recording fees are all going to be different. So there's no rule of thumb that says closing costs are X percentage of the sales price.
Oh, yeah.
If you're purchasing a condominium or a townhome, sometimes the association, they have closing costs that the buyer has to pay.
And just to not interrupt your flow too much, but just so you understand where, he's about to go anyways, is what we all just sort of talked about really would be like a single family home or something more along the lines of that, single family residential. And now when we switch to a condo, or we might even say a townhouse as well, or you could almost even make an argument, a single family home in an HOA.
Correct.
Which you don't see a lot of that here. You see a lot of that stuff in like Florida and all of that. South Carolina.
Yeah, mainly it's anything that has an HOA.
HOA, right.
But sometimes we'll see where maybe the HOA has an application fee. Another common thing that HOAs charge is sometimes what's called capital contribution. So they take anywhere from, I've seen 1 to 2 to 3 months worth of whatever that monthly HOA fee is. They collect that at closing. That goes into their slush fund that they use for maintenance, to cut the grass. So if anybody is looking to buy a condo, I know Matt and I, when we're working with buyers that do purchase a condo, we're calling the HOA up front so I can get that information directly from the horse's mouth. So when I'm having that conversation with the buyer, I can say, here's your closing costs, and then here's what the HOA wants in closing costs as well.
And, we'll do a whole nother video on this. I'm sure we will at some point if it's not up there already by the time, everybody's watching this. When it comes to HOAs, that is a whole separate conversation as well, because some of the HOAs, once again, I'm going to segue here, but just for a minute, and then I'll put a pin in it, is I will have buyers say, I want to save money on taxes. I don't want to pay $12,000, $13,000. I want to go to an HOA because the taxes are lower, right? You might say this condo here, as an example, it's only $6,000 a year in taxes. And I'm like, yeah, but the HOA monthly fee is $500. And 500 times 12 is 6,000, and now you're really back to where you started.
I mean, the one thing to look at too, though, like I know I used to live in a condominium, and included in my HOA fee was my water, heat, garbage, parking. You know, so at least I got some bang for my buck, you know, when I paid that HOA fee versus, you know, other associations, it just covers like the maintenance. It doesn't include the water. It doesn't include the heat. You know, maybe it includes parking, but, you know, that's something that you have to look into if you are looking to purchase a condo.
That's a lot of HOA talk. I mean, good talk. We're definitely going to put a pin in it because we're going to do a whole thing on the HOA. But coming back to the closing cost, if you go with an HOA, which is how we got on this subject, is you are going to be incurring some other additional
potentially
costs.
I mean, there's some HOAs that don't charge fees. There's others that do. So again, I mean, that's something, you know, proactively, that if a client's looking in a specific HOA and they're thinking about making an offer, I'm making that phone call ahead of time so I can determine, you know, hey, Bob and Susie, you're thinking about making an offer on 123 Main Street. If your offer is accepted, this HOA has $2,000 in closing costs that you have to pay at closing.
That's a big number, 2,000.
I mean, some are that high. This was a couple of years ago. It was like a $300,000 price point in Union County. The HOA fees at closing were like $3,000.
Is there anything else? I mean, we've talked about HOA fees, recording fees, you got title, homeowners insurance. Obviously, taxes are the big thing. Appraisal's the big thing.
Correct.
And I think you mentioned it, but just to reiterate, the attorney is not most likely going to work for free, and their fee is also usually in closing costs. So to be clear, typically with an attorney, at least my preferred attorney, you do not pay the attorney up front out of pocket. They collect their fee out of the closing cost.
Correct. Also, let's say, for instance, that somebody was closing on the 15th of the month. Part of the closing cost is going to be prepaid mortgage interest from the 15th of the month till the 1st of the coming month. So, you know, if somebody were to close on, let's say, August 3rd, for instance, they're paying interest from the 3rd till the 1st, versus if somebody were to close on the 30th, then they may only be paying 1 to 2 days worth of interest at closing.
So you have interest potentially depending on when you close.
Correct.
Because when I think of interest too, it just triggers tax. You know, it triggers kind of that feel, you know, taxes and interest. So you could, I mean, if I don't want to say if all the stars align. Technically, if all the stars align in this analogy, this is the one time the stars aren't good. You're going to have taxes. You could have interest. You could, if it's an HOA, right? You could have all of it.
Yep. One other thing too, in New Jersey, if the sales price exceeds $1 million, so if you buy a home for $1 million, you're not subject to this. If you buy a home for $1,001, the state of New Jersey,
you could say like 1 million and a penny.
You could, yeah. So if you offer, you know, $1 million and 1 penny, the state of New Jersey has what's called a mansion tax, which is 1% of the sales price, which again is paid at closing. So, you know, I've had clients before that, you know, they buy a $1.1 million house and the taxes are, say, $36,000 a year. Unfortunately, New Jersey has taxes that high, but, you know, their closing costs could be like $36,000. That's on top of whatever their down payment is.
Because we've heavily focused on the buyer perspective here, you know, when it comes to closing costs. Because in Jersey, once again, I say in Jersey, I'm licensed in Florida as well. So there are some nuanced differences when I, you know, have knowledge of other states. In Jersey, pretty much everything, all the closing cost falls onto the buyer, right? The buyer. But what about the selling side? Do they have the realty?
Yes.
Real estate transfer tax, I believe, is what the seller incurs. So once again, all the stuff we've talked about, all this interest and the taxes and titles and the recording, like all of this stuff where you get this big number, depending on the house. I mean, I know we've seen some homes, the closing costs have been $15,000 and $17,000, depending on the price of the house and taxes. You can get a big number. When it comes to the seller, however, the seller doesn't completely escape. There are some charges, closing costs that you will incur as well, seller. And I think one of those that comes to mind is realty.
Yeah, the transfer tax, which if you're over 62 and a half years old, the state does offer a discount. But mainly from the sales side, you're going to have your transfer tax, you're going to have your real estate commission, you're going to have your attorney fee, and that's pretty much it.
Okay, so pretty much just like 3 things, handful of items at best.
Yep.
So that covers down payment at the beginning, get an idea. That's between you and the lender. Right? And seller real estate representation, stay in your lane. So, right? So the buyer and the lender, the down payment and the loan, that's all with Brian. It's all with the bank between you and the buyer. But once again, you do have closing cost buyers. So be aware that beyond down payment, You will have all these other things that Brian just listed, and obviously seller, you will have a handful of items as well. Is there anything you want to add before we get out of here?
One thing that I forgot to mention too, so say there's a water bill or a sewer bill. Sometimes those are paid either annually or biannually. Let's just say that I'm buying a home and the seller has an annual sewer bill that they've already paid. Let's say, for instance, I close on August the 1st. Part of my closing cost would also be me giving them back funds, a prorated amount for those 5 months that now I own the home and they don't. I got to credit them back for that sewer bill that they've already paid that covered the entire year. Typically, though, if we're going to see any like sewer fees, water fees at closing that are prorated, they're nominal numbers.
And it's good that you brought that up with utilities. As you're talking, I was thinking, oil tanks. With oil, when you have a seller, in the Northeast, once again, if you live in the state, you're pretty much aware of it. If you're coming into the Northeast, oil, heat is very big up here. So if you've got a big tank full of oil, and as the seller, you're like,
I just spent $2,500 and filled up my tank like last week.
well, if that oil changes over to the buyer, buyer, you in a sense sort of are going to reimburse the seller for the oil that just got put in that tank. So
Correct.
Utilities do come into play potentially in closing costs. All right, well, if you had fun, if you found this video entertaining, feel free to click the subscribe button, tap the bell for notifications so you can be the first one to be alerted to amazing videos like this one. Once again, thank you for giving us your time. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and share.
Awesome. Bye-bye.